The Chicago Bulls are officially heading into a new era. Now we kind of know what Michael Reinsdorf is looking for in a GM, even though the complications that they're adding to the job, there's a difference of perspective from the national media on, is this actually going to be a premier job, one that is coveted around the league, or are the people actually turned off because of the Reinsdorfs and their desire to keep on from Billy Donovan? We'll talk about both conflicting reports, where we sit, but what Michael Reinsdorf has basically communicated that he's looking for in the next GM. We'll talk about all that, plus an update to the tank watch and more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. So just to break it down and give a roadmap, right? We're going to be talking about what the Bulls are looking for in their next GM, the Billy Donovan non-negotiable, and then what the league perception of the Bulls job is. We're also going to talk a little bit about all the Bulls alum that have been mentioned around, possibly being in the running for the next front office, or whatever there. Then we'll get into the tank watch, right? So let's start off with what the Bulls are looking for in their new GM, president, person that's guiding the direction of this organization. There are a few things that Michael Reinsdorf laid out that he really wanted from the next person to have this job. And how do we feel about that, right? So one, he did say he wants somebody who's a process-oriented, a communicator, and evaluator, right? So let's just deal with the process, right? Michael Reinsdorf talked a lot about the process, and, you know, people, even you Bulls fans, have talked about the parts that were missing in AK's process, the bad process part of it, right? With the Bulls wanting to win, but only win if it's sustainable, that the process part of it is the most important. Now, I know when we hear the process, we think about the process that Philly did. That's not what we're talking about here, right? We're not talking about trust the process. We're just talking about the way that the person does their job. They go about their job, how they have things set up, right? And how they evaluate is directly part of that, right? So you have to have somebody. And the thing that I always go to in the way, you have to have somebody that cares about winning more than you. That's the process part for me that I would love to see. Somebody who's willing to do whatever it takes to put a winning team out. That may include trading some players that you or I don't necessarily want to see traded. But if it ends up being the right move for the team, they have to do that. Somebody who's going to be aggressive about seeing their vision through, right? That has to be there. How you do your job is as important as the job that you do, right? The way that you go about it, you have to think not only in now and in the future sense. I always talk about the thing, this phrase fan brain, right? That's what I call it. I don't mean it to be offensive, really, because we all suffer from it. I do. Everybody does. Is that we suffer from kind of zeroing in on one thing, right? Like, for example, I'll say one of the fan brain things right now is people still talk about, oh, well, we absolutely have to draft a center at number 9. And I'm telling you right now, if you are still at this point of the season, at this point, you're still talking about the center, you are caught up in a different version of the team. Right now, the team needs talent, right? They need talent more than anything than a position. But us as fans, we start thinking about positions. We don't think about really reading the draft board. We think about, hey, whatever, X, Y, Z, right? This team is in a completely different position than what it was. So you have to have somebody that thinks about not only the now, the immediate, but also the future with everything. One thing that I will say AK did not do in his time here is really focus on the floor of the players that he drafted. He drafted these players that had high ceilings reportedly, but didn't really think about the floor. We saw the floor more than we saw the ceiling, and that you want somebody who really thinks about that, right? The communication part of it. There's no doubt about it that I think even when AK did have some solid plans, right? Like, you know, wanting to see the Chicago Bulls shot profile change, wanting to become more modern in the way that the Chicago Bulls played basketball, right? Like AK wanted those things, but the way that he communicated it was shit. And it just, we have not had, since John Paxson, we have not had anybody in the front office that really is a good communicator. I wouldn't even say John is necessarily the best. He's just better than Gar. He's better than AK. He's better than Mark Eversley. He's better than most of the people that we've had in that over the last 20 years. But you want somebody who's going to be a really good communicator for this team. And so I think you have that. But you also have to have somebody that has the conviction. Somebody who's not afraid to pull the trigger, right? Somebody who's willing to take risk And that is something as well that we've lacked here. So somebody who's really willing to take those risks, right? So, and even when Michael Reinsdorf laughed on there about how good the communication from the front office has been over the last year, how bad it's been, I think that really tells you, right? In direct quote from Michael Reinsdorf, I want someone who is really strong in communication, not just internally, but also externally with the media, with our fans. I think that's an incredibly important, and you know why it is important? It's important because you have to have an ability to navigate words that people can believe you, that you instill faith with your words. And we haven't had that for Chicago for way too long, right? Also, you need somebody who analyzes the trends around the league. And that is something, again, that AK was behind the 8 ball on. We were always behind the modern whatever was going on in the NBA. It was almost like AK was so caught up in just the Bulls scope that he forgot that he had to also look at the trends that were going on around the NBA, right? So, you look at the Warriors using their cap space to get KD. That's a thing, right? The Bulls at that time were doubling down on Jimmy Butler, Dwayne Wade, and Zach LaVine and Jabari Parker, right? Like not really thinking about, hey, where's a player that we can target, right? You look at some of the teams, and I'll give you the credit. That's something, again, Pax did. When you look at the free agency where we got Boozer and we got, Ronnie Brewer, we were able to completely revamp the team. The Bulls planned for that offseason. They planned for that. Even before they drafted Derrick Rose, they were starting to set up their contracts. Part of the reason they didn't, re-sign Ben Gordon. They were starting to set up their money to get ready for that offseason. And to a degree, I guess you can say that AK set up his money for this offseason to make a swing, but there's no big free agents here. It's all restricted free agents, which still could be a target, but those teams, it's always risky restricted free agents because the team has the right to match the contract. So you want somebody who's going to look at the trends. You want somebody who's going to survey and read the tea leaves that are going on in this league if you really want to do that, right? And then the other part that Michael Reinsdorf talked about is surrounding himself with talent, right? He wants the next GM to build a staff so strong that the next guy is already lined up if things go south. That is something that we see from really good front offices. You see it in Boston. You see it in definitely in OKC. You see it in Miami, which, Miami's had a rough season, but that's still a franchise that has done it pretty much right over the years, right? So you want somebody that also surrounds himself with really good talent, builds a talented staff, something similar to what Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson did in Chicago. I know I keep going to the Bears a lot, but that is something there. You need talented people around you, but you also have to listen to those people. Towards the end here, the things that we heard about AK not listening to anybody that didn't share his view, I said that was hugely concerning because you didn't create just an echo chamber. You can't do that if you want to stay ahead of trends. You have to get people around you that you trust and that you want to hear their voice and that you actually give them a voice, right? That's how you empower a staff. I think the next guy has to do that very well. Another thing that Michael Reinsdorf mentioned is that he wants a basketball evaluator, somebody that knows basketball, that makes good picks, right? And I think that should be one of the most obvious parts of this job. It is a basketball job, but I don't think Gar was that. I think Gar was a solid scout, but I don't think Gar had that. I don't know what Mark Eversley's skill set was because he didn't talk enough. And AK, it is what it is, right? And then the word that we hear with all of this, with the Bulls, is collaborative. They want to work somebody who works well with the scouting department, the development department, the analytics, the performance, the coaching. They want somebody who has their hands in a little bit of everything and understands everything. That way you can actually guide and lead a front office. And that's really what you want. And then sustainable success. We don't want the short burst of success. We want success that is sustainable, that you can build off of year after year and then get to a new place, get to new heights. That's what you want to do, right? So it all sounds great, but there are some questions that are raised by that, right? The fact that if Billy Donovan wants to stay here, which we'll find out Monday. This is probably the last time I'm going to talk about the Billy Donovan aspect of all this because we're going to find out on Monday. He has his meeting with ownership Monday. We may find out by the evening. We might find out Tuesday morning. But, the Billy Donovan part of it, it is what it is. I do think it does limit candidates, and I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing to do, right? It seems like, and I said this in the Discord, it seems like at this point, the Chicago Bulls are hiring the right person for Billy and not necessarily focus on the right person to overall for the Bulls. Now, maybe that works, right? If your guy is Billy Donovan and you get somebody in who's going to be collaborative, work with him, all that type of stuff, and they can have the success doing it, cool, we may never hear about it again. But if you hire somebody that is almost in a way working for Billy, and then the Billy thing doesn't work out, what is that then? Are we in another 3 or 5 years going through another front office? Like, that's the question here, right? So there's that part of it, right? And I do think it asks some questions about the power structure here in Chicago, because if you're already telling your candidates, hey, Billy is our guy, is that candidate going to come in and feel like, well, damn, who's actually running the show here? Is it me or is it Billy Donovan, right? Like, so those are all questions that we've talked about. I don't want to really kind of focus in on those just by themselves because we talked about it ad nauseum already, but the Billy Donovan part of it and the loyalty that the Bulls have, that the ownership has to Billy Donovan, I just wonder if that adds a complication that doesn't necessarily need to be there if you hire the right person, trust them to do their damn job. But with that said, right, I want to get into this, right, into the part of it, the non-negotiable. We know about that about Billy Donovan, but how is this job viewed around the league, right? There's a number of different perspectives on it. If you listen to the Zach Lowe show, Zach Lowe said this: I talked to a front office free agent who would have his pick of any job if they came open, and he said to me, what would you do if you were me? I said, whoever saves the Bulls will be a legend in the NBA forever. And he said to me, that sounds great in theory. I don't trust the ownership. Okay, right? So that is put together a thing there that people are saying, hey, people don't trust Bulls ownership. No shit, right? Like, Bulls ownership, say what you will about it, either them hiring people and getting out the way, but the fact of the matter is your franchise, which is in the third largest market in the world, which is a major city in this country, and is a franchise that is storied. We talk about all the time how the Chicago Bulls have a built-in huge fan base because they rose in the 90s at the same time the game of basketball was growing, and there's so are people in other countries who they associate basketball with the Chicago Bulls. But unfortunately, you've not built off of that in 20 years, other than the Derrick Rose era, right? Like, and it is what it is there. So, there's that part of it. But there are conflicting reports on it because we do have that, but then we also have Shams who said this. And so you hear from Shams there saying that he's talked to people, from around the league, and that they are not necessarily out on the job, which is great, right? And that's the thing that you look to around there. You even get Brian Windhorst, who Brian Windhorst, himself as well talked about how, Dallas would be better and more intriguing than the Bulls because of Cooper, but then talked about also that the Bulls, that it's still viewed as a quality opening. So there's already a difference of view in the media on how the Bulls' job is viewed. You have the Zach Lowe's, the Ben Simmons, right, or Bill Simmons. You have those guys who talk about this job, and they talk about it from the outside perspective of other people. But then you have people like Shams and Windhorst who are saying it like, no, this is going to be a quality job, and people are going to be interested in it. And so it just raises the question, like, if the Bulls have their choice of the cream of the crop, let's just say for this conversation that they have their choice, is that Billy Donovan aspect and and again, not about Billy being good or not, but is the freedom in that and getting to make the decision of your head coach, is that what's going to be could turn it a little bit. And that's what you got to see, right? The Bulls have been in irrelevance for far too long. And so I think when you look at it, the refusal of some of the things from the front office, but at the same time, there's only 30 of these jobs in the league. That's it. There's only 30 of these jobs in the world. And so at that point, you have to understand that it's already not a lot of these versions of this job, right? So, I get it. If somebody who has their pick of the litter and they want their power to say so, they may look at the Bulls and say, listen, I can go wherever the hell I want to go. If you're going to limit me and tie my hands already from the start on talking to me about a coach that I may or may not want to keep, then I'm just going to go where I have my flexibility, and that part can be removed. Best of wishes for you in your search. That's very well what could happen here. And it seems like the Reinsdorfs are perfectly fine with that. Direct quote from Michael Reinsdorf: if we interview somebody and Billy isn't for them, then they're probably not for us. And so it seems like not only is ownership set this line in the sand, but they are also fine with whatever limitations that brings in their search. And hey, for what it is, right? Now, the Bulls are still a big market. The Bulls still have a first-round pick, and we'll see if the draft lottery does get into the top 4. Does that make it even more promising? But then you have cap flexibility, you have roster flexibility, no real bad contracts except for P. Will. So there's a lot here that can make this job. Just looking at the job itself, the question just becomes about the Reinsdorf's ownership on top of their Billy Donovan agenda, right? The non-negotiable for Billy Donovan. Does that make it, more or less, right? And so we'll see what happens in that one. But then let's get into some of the candidates that have been talked about, right? There have been a number of former Bulls recently that have been brought up as potential for this job. Mike Dunleavy, Kyle Korver, Luol Deng, Matt Floyd. Matt Floyd is the only one that's in this conversation that actually is in a front office right now, right? As far as running some things. But of course, we've heard about the Masai Ujiris. Of course, we've heard about the Bob Myers. Of course, we've heard about those guys, right? And those guys are great, right? Mike Dunleavy Jr. right now is working on with the Warriors. His best move with the Warriors is what? Trade him for Jimmy Butler? I think so far, right? We've talked about Bob Myers, the plus and minuses there with Bob Myers. We've talked about Masai Ujiri and what he built there with the Toronto Raptors. There's some that believe in his drafting, some that don't, right? When he comes down to it, he led them. He did draft Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Norman Powell, Scotty Barnes. So he did draft some players down there as well. The thing with the Bulls alum, though, Luol Deng has zero front office experience. I was asked in the Discord, how do I feel about Luol? And I was like, I don't know how to feel about Luol because as a person, as a player, and as a former Bull, of course I love Luol Deng, right? And Luol is an amazing guy. You look at how he got that program off for the Olympics basically by himself, self-funded, all that type of stuff. But at the same time, he has had no role in a NBA front office for me to actually say what he can do. I don't know what he knows how to do with contracts or, recruitment or anything like that. I don't know any of that, right? You look at Kyle Korver in this as well. Kyle Korver, is a guy that right now, Kyle Korver is, I think, on the Hawks staff, which is really good, right? And, he has a guy in Jalen Johnson down there as well. He's done some work down there. Really good. Shout out to Kyle Korver for doing that. But how much of that can be credited for Kyle Korver? We don't fucking know, right? So we don't know what Kyle Korver has done down there. So you have these things and these people that are being presented, mainly by Joe Cowley. He's presented a lot of these guys. I'll just say this. It feels like, what did I say when this all went down? Is that the Bulls hired outside of the family to get AK and Mark Eversley in here. John Paxson was in the family. Gar Forman was in the family, right? Guys that worked up to that were in the family. They were people that either played for the Bulls or worked up in this organization. That's why it leads me to go to Matt Lloyd, right? A guy that right now is with the Timberwolves. He's beloved there. The president, Tim Connolly, loves him. Now, the problem that I would have in this is say this. We hired a Tim Connolly disciple before an AK. And again, it may have nothing. They could be two very different people. Now, Matt Floyd came up with as an unpaid intern with the Chicago Bulls and actually started here. But I think when you look at that, you look at the core that they built around Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert and got to the Western Conference Finals 2 years in a row, right? Tim Connolly said this about Matt Floyd. He's one of the most well-respected guys in our profession. He's got the acumen and the work ethic, and he's got a wonderful emotional IQ. Someone really smart is going to hire him as their president. And so there you go. Right now, Tim Connolly just got Ayo Dosunmu from us, like he was part of and Matt Floyd did that. But I'm starting to think that with what we're hearing about the openness to want to work with Billy Donovan, Matt Floyd has talked about the collaborative nature that he had with Tom Thibodeau and other coaches here when he was here, right? And so I'm starting to think that Matt Lloyd may be the front runner for this job, just based off the criteria that Michael Reinsdorf wants, and then the fact that I do think he's somebody that take the collaborative part of it and be like, okay, cool. Like, Matt Floyd is talking about how loyal Paxson is and how loyal people are. Like, he understands what it's like to work in this organization because he's seen it. So him hearing any of these things that have popped up that could be a surprise to other GMs or whatever else, I don't think Matt Lloyd's going to be surprised by that. So that's why I do think Matt Lloyd has a pretty good inside in it to come into this team, and he's already with a winning organization. So I think right now Matt Lloyd is probably my favorite to run away with this position, but we'll see what's going to end up happening with that one. But before we go, we got to update Tank Watch. It's the last week of the season. You're probably going to get an update with me on this every single day. But the Portland Trailblazers lost to the Spurs last night, despite the Spurs not having Wemby, and they got good games from Denny Advia and Scoot Henderson. But now, with them losing that game, they're a game behind the Los Angeles Clippers. They do play the Clippers on Friday, and then they turn around and play the Kings on Sunday. They have to win both these games to win the 8th seed. And because they do own the tiebreaker over the Kings, they have to win both those games. So the game against the Clippers on Friday would get them a game advantage over the Clippers, and then they could seal it in with the final win over the Kings on Sunday. So they got to do that. But they also got to hope for what it's worth as well that, that the Clippers, lose that game. Well, it's against them. So, we'll end up seeing what happens here. But if the Bulls want that Portland Trailblazers pick, which would be around 15th or 16th, the Blazers are going to have to, not have to, because either way, the Blazers are going into the play-in. This is just to get the Blazers to the 8th seed, so they have 2 games to win 1 game. If they get to the 8th seed, if they stay at 9th seed, it's single elimination for them. They lose once they're out, right? So that's what's going to happen in the tank watch for them and the Bulls potentially getting their pick. And we'll see what's going to happen in that case. For the Chicago Bulls, part of it in all of this for tank watch and stuff like that, like it just comes down to, the Bulls can get the 9th seed. We still have a half-game lead over the Milwaukee Bucks for the 9th spot in the lottery. So the Chicago Bulls just got to keep losing. We got 3 games left on the season now. Let's keep losing. We play today, and we'll see what's going to happen there because we know Giannis isn't coming back, and that Bucks team is focused on their draft odds. So we're going to see what's going to happen here. At the end of the day, the Bulls are still going to need more luck. But if we want that additional first-round pick, we're going to need that help from the Portland Trail Blazers. So let's see if we can get that. But that's going to do it for today's episode, man. This front office is one of the most important decisions that this franchise has made in years. And they have to get this right because we've seen it now. When you don't get your front office and the person running your show day to day, when you don't get that decision right, how that sets back your franchise. So let's hope that the Bulls can get it together. But if you're already putting restrictions on that hire, the question is, are you really giving yourself the best chance to succeed? Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments below. Do you trust this process? Let me know that down below. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel as well. You can follow us at Bull Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that is thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.